Most of the time, most of us are convinced that we know far more than we actually do, even according to our own common sense ideas of what real knowledge is. Let me hasten to say that Gabrielle and I both do this too. But if we're going to understand anything about ignorance, getting a good grip on our own ignorance is a good place to start.
We're not just referring to things that we think we know that turn out to be wrong. In fact, let's start with what we know that's true. Something simple, like the Earth is not flat.
I've asked classrooms of students how many of them know the Earth is round. Almost all hands go up. Then I asked them how many of them could prove it, or offer a reasonable argument in its favor that would pass even a mild skeptic's scrutiny. Almost all hands go down.
Well, like us, most of them will have received that message from sources they trust. Indeed, most of what we think we know is what we've read or heard from someone who in turn was told it by someone else, and so on. So the vast majority of what we usually consider knowledge isn't even second-hand. It really is third-hand and far removed from our direct experience.
There's a difference, then, between what we know from first-hand experience and asserting a belief that we've absorbed third-hand and being able to back it up with supporting evidence or arguments. A great deal of what we think we know is socially constructed in the sense of being told to us by parents, schools, the media, and so on. This isn't only the case with rumors or myths. It's true of a lot of things we take as good common sense.
So let's look at why we know a lot less than we think we do. There are 5 good reasons for this. First, finding out everything for ourselves is simply impossible. We don't have enough time, brain power, and access to other resources to do this.
In addition, making first-hand discoveries involves risks. It's much safer to learn what's poisonous vicariously than to find out for yourself. And some kinds of inquiry also carry social risks because they might violate cultural taboos or offend important people. Most of us would not really know whether a professor or a boss has the qualifications they claim, but asking to see their degrees or certificates could be quite risky.
A second reason why we know a lot less than we think we do is that we have a propensity to fill in the blanks. We do that both in recalling past events and in interpreting current ones.
Imagine this scenario. A friend gestures to a bowl of food he's eating and says, "This stuff is hot." If we're at a table in an Indian restaurant eating curries, I'll fill in the blank by inferring that he means chili hot or spicy. On the other hand, if we're in a Russian restaurant devouring piroshki, I'll infer that he means high temperature. In either situation, I'll think I know what my friend means, but strictly speaking, I don't. A huge amount of what we think of as understanding and communication of nearly every kind relies on inferences and interpretations of this kind.
Interestingly, memory is similarly reconstructive. We only have fragments of genuine recollections, and we fill in the blanks to generate an account that sounds plausible and coherent.
Hindsight bias is a related problem, and a third reason why we think we know more than we do. Hindsight bias is the tendency to overestimate the extent to which we knew it all along when a prediction comes true.
This has been studied a lot in psychology. The typical psychological experiment demonstrating hindsight bias asks people to make a prediction about an event and then later to recall how confident they were in their prediction. When the event that people predicted occurred, their recollection is that they were much more confident in their prediction than when the event that they predicted did not occur. In the readings for this week, you'll find an accessible article by Paul Goodwin where he points out that an additional downside to hindsight bias is that it can make us overconfident about our predictive abilities.
This brings us to the fourth reason, which is that we all suffer from a tendency to be overconfident about our estimations and predictions. If we're asked to give a lower and upper estimate of a quantity we don't know, such as the weight of a Boeing 767 airliner, and we're instructed to give lower and upper estimates that we're 90% confident will contain the correct answer, the chance of our estimates containing the true answer turns out to be around 40 to 50%. In other words, our intervals are consistently too narrow.
Oddly, we tend to be overconfident in domains that we know the least about or where it's harder to make an estimation. Having said that though, experts don't escape overconfidence, even when they're making estimates in their area of expertise. Just as with the Boeing 767 example, when business managers were asked to give upper and lower limits which they thought had a 90% chance of estimating quantities that were within the limits of their expertise, such as predicted profits in their own business lines, their intervals contained the correct values only 38 to 58% of the time instead of 90% of the time.
Fifth, and finally, perhaps the most unsettling domain where we mislead ourselves about how much we know, is the workings of our own minds. Introspection has a checkered history in psychology, and a majority of cognitive psychologists these days would hold it to be an invalid and unreliable source of data on mental processes. The classic paper in this vein is Robert Nisbet and Timothy Wilson's 1977 work, in which they concluded that people are unable to accurately report their mental processes, or whether a mental process has occurred. Now, Wilson and Nisbet realized that there are powerful motivations for our unawareness of our unawareness. They pointed out that it's natural to prefer to believe that we have access to our own thoughts. It's frightening to think that we don't know the workings of our own minds any better than an outsider who knows us reasonably well.
We've just seen that in several ways we're more ignorant than we like to think we are. But so what? First, because we have to rely on so much knowledge that's not based on our own experience, it's harder for us to recognise when knowledge has changed. At one time, everyone knew that the world was flat, or that the sun revolved around the earth, and it took a long time for that knowledge to change. Another consequence of relying on knowledge from others is that we're vulnerable to being hoodwinked by persuasive communicators. It turns out that we give the same weight to what some authority or majority says as we do to our own experience, sometimes even greater weight. Third, our propensity to fill in the blanks often leads to miscommunication. I'm sure you can find examples of this from your own experience. Finally, if we're unaware of various biases in our thinking, we end up falling prey to them. Again, I'm sure we can all think of examples of hindsight bias and overconfidence in our estimates and predictions.
Nevertheless, this isn't cause for gloom. After all, most of us navigate our way through life in this world quite well. In this course, we'll explore what ignorance is like, how it gets created and destroyed, when and where ignorance is bliss, and what we do with our own and others' ignorance. Along the way, we'll examine links ignorance has with decision-making, social interaction, and even social institutions, and the economy. We'll find out about when ignorance can be good or bad for us. We'll also see that ignorance is deceptively difficult to pin down. It's a complex and slippery concept with a lot of pitfalls for the unwary. We'll get a taste of that complexity in the next lecture, where we'll examine the various metaphors that we use for the unknown.